I would like to take the chance and opportunity to bring to your attention some of the major concerns, particularly now because of intensification of severe repression in Iran, especially after the ceasefire. The Mullah regime, in order to try to preserve their very fragile system and very repressive, brutal regime, started a very huge arbitrary arrest of hundreds and exceeded the number over 1,000 of especially supporters of the PMOI, family members, and the Iranian dissidents in different locations throughout Iran. And they also exceeded and intensified arbitrary executions. This has been very alarming, particularly considering the regime's recent statement by their henchmen, especially at the Revolutionary Guards Corps. If I may bring to your attention, it was on 8th of July, the Fars News Agency, which is a state-governed agency and very much affiliated with the Mullah's regime and Revolutionary Guards Corps, made an announcement which was chilling and, of course, shocking. And in that announcement, they said that it is time now for them to repeat the experience of the 1988 massacre. They call it executions, and they call that to be a very historical, successful experience by the Islamic Republic of the Mullah regime. It was very much helpful for the regime to be able to sustain security, and that the regime was able then to continue the rule of theocracy in Iran. This remarks and very clear acknowledgement by the Mullah regime IRGC has been absolutely shocking. It is a very clear warning rather than some propaganda or some sort of a news. It is very explicitly a clear warning to all the political prisoners, political dissidents throughout Iran.
But I did want to be with you in order to express my solidarity again with the work that the National Council for Resistance in Iran has ceaselessly done over all of these decades. And I know that one day we will see that achieved, and I've always said that Dowlat would make the most wonderful chief whip when she's in the Iranian parliament and she's knocking everybody into shape, making sure that we don't step out of line, that we get there and we take part in the events that she will then be organising in a democratic rather than theocratic Iran. So, fellow parliamentarians, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, as we've heard from Dowlat, the Iranian regime is taking advantage of the crisis over its nuclear dossier to intensify the domestic repression. This is a desperate attempt to crush dissent and eliminate the organised resistance that advances the protest movement. Just this weekend, we received reports of a fresh wave of executions, a grim, tragic reminder of the regime's limitless suppression. What's unfolding is chillingly familiar to all of us here. It echoes the summer of 1988, when 30,000 political prisoners were summarily executed in Iran's prisons after a fatwa from the then Supreme Leader Khomeini. That atrocity was not an isolated incident. It was the continuation of a brutal campaign by the regime which began in the early 1980s when I first became involved with the NCRI. It was an aim to eliminate dissidents that insisted on democratic republic than religious tyranny. And it's worth saying that the Joint Committee on Human Rights at its meeting last Wednesday unanimously agreed a report on transnational repression. And although I can't tell you what's in that report because it's about to be published, what I can say is that amongst the evidence that we took, which had a big effect on members of the committee, was from Hossein Abedi, who is known to many of you, member of the NCRI, and described how he was left bleeding on the street as a result of an attempt by assassins to end his life. So I commend that report to you, but I also commend a report which is published by us, by the committee last week, on the current crime and policing bill. And like our report on the Yazidis, which will be debated in the House of Lords in September, the report calls for universal jurisdiction, and that would have an immediately enabling effect in bringing to justice in British courts people who perpetrate the kind of crimes against their own citizens in Iran who are outside of our jurisdiction at the present time. This would enable us to bring the leaders to trial.
Good morning, everyone. It is a privilege to stand with you to support this campaign and the call to action, the call to end executions in Iran. Yet again, we have to call for the end of executions in Iran. We have to call for saving the lives of political prisoners and others facing death simply for demanding justice, accountability, and the basic freedoms that we here take so much for granted. I'd like to associate myself with the powerful remarks of Noble Lord Lord Alton and with the remarks of Noble Lord Lord McCabe. And I will endorse and do endorse the call to our government to recognise the 1988 massacre as a crime against humanity. As Dolat has said, last week I chaired a timely meeting in Parliament on Iran's future, at which we discussed the NCRI's third option, which is change by Iran's people and resistance. And we heard directly from Madame Rajavi, the president-elect of the NCRI, and she warned us that the regime's escalating repression, including this recent wave of executions and the prioritized targeting of democratic opposition, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, targeting them with death sentences. And it's a deliberate attempt of further repression to block any popular uprisings, to silence dissent. Madame Rajavi was very clear. She said, since 2 years ago, when Khomeini escalated his regional warmongering, his primary objective has been to block the path of popular uprisings inside Iran.
The floor is yours now.
Well, thank you very much. Look, there's not an awful lot to add to what you've heard already. We know now that there was a terrible massacre in 1988 where about 30,000 people were executed. The world stood by, it ignored it, it let the people responsible for it get away with it. And now they've reached a similar point of crisis in the regime where they feel that they're under threat. There is resistance within the country. People are challenging them. People are engaged in acts of civil disobedience. People are challenging the right of the regime. And now, as they face this crisis, the regime have made it clear that they think the answer is to repeat. They think the answer is to repeat the massacre once more. It's their way of dealing with political dissent. They simply round up dissidents, and as we've heard, by a process of moving people from one jail to another, separating people in order to break their spirit and any sense of solidarity. They gradually isolate them. Families, other political contacts lose connection with them. They don't know where they are, and these people are systematically executed. It's almost certain that what they're indicating by all their statements and actions is a repetition of that now.
Thank you, Dalit, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very important meeting called in this emergency situation where we have news that the regime is preparing to start mass executions of political prisoners. I'm a lawyer, as you know, who's defended human rights over many decades, and for the last 20 years as a member of the Human Rights Commission at the Federation of European Bar Associations. As Dalit says, we represent over 1 million lawyers over all countries of the Council of Europe, which focuses on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Our federation is known by its initials, FBE, and our commission is known for its work in supporting human rights and human rights defenders in those countries where rights are violated, and Iran is one of the countries where we support the defenders of human rights. There are many human rights defenders who are in prison in Iran. In particular, we know of lawyers imprisoned for doing their professional job in defending protesters and activists who insist on their civil, political, and human rights. As we know, the regime has long targeted independent lawyers and civil society advocates. The nationwide protests beginning in September 2022